Hey folks, it's Anna McHugh. I want to share with you a fairly small collection of 4 different mushroom species, or 5 different mushroom species that I've found in one of my favorite and most prolific oak groves for summer mushrooms. And so, first of all, I want to gloat in a self-deprecating way about the chanterelle mushrooms I've found. These are the only 2 mature chanterelles I have located this year in 2022. I give a little giggle because it's been quite dry. Typically, by this time of year, this particular grove is really quite active, but I have enough for like a, very, very small or very, very lightly topped chanterelle pizza today. Nonetheless, I'm delighted to have them in hand, and I want to show you the identification features. I also have a couple toxic mushrooms and a beautiful bolete type mushroom called boletes oriflammeus. So I will share that with you, and then finally a false turkey tail, Sterium austria. But let's start with the chanterelles. So chanterelles are great because they're very abundant. They're mycorrhizal, meaning that they're a mutualist and they grow with oak. And they, are perennial. So you'll see them in the same patches year after year, oftentimes very abundantly. And they're very easy to identify if you're, kind of familiar with the different parts of a mushroom fruiting body. So let's go through that really quickly. First of all, you have a mushroom that doesn't have a really, distinct cap and stem. Some chanterelles look a little bit less like a flower than these, but these are actually pretty iconic for you have a stem, but then what you have is more of an indeterminate flowery mushroom that emerges. And instead of gills or something similar, you have what's called false gills. So these are little wrinkles, but they're not, deep and blade-like. So you have a couple of look-alike mushrooms that have deep blade-like gills, but with the chanterelles, it's just basically, a layer of wrinkliness on top of it. If you scrape it off, and this is the case in many chanterelle species, you can scrape those, false gills right off, and underneath you have sort of a, creamy whitish color, and that is the color also of the flesh inside. So, besides this sort of wrinkly gilled situation that you have going on, when you open up a chanterelle, what you'll see is white tissue on the inside. So it's, here, I'm jiggling around and I've had a lot of coffee. So, it's white, kind of like string cheese, almost in, in appearance, if not consistency. Looks like I have a little bit of bug action in here, but, when they're in good condition, they kind of split apart nice and stringy like that. That also makes them really nice for, it's easy to just pull them apart and cook them. You don't really need to, chop up chanterelles if you can just, pull them apart in little pieces like this. So I'm going to be very careful now that I've already made my pizza topping, or very, very small pizza topping, out of this one. I do want to show you one other feature of the chanterelles that I see a lot in my area. So I picked this mushroom probably about 45 minutes ago, and it did not have this sort of yellowish color to it. And so, sort of a burnt orangey color. So over time, a lot of our chanterelles start to take up this, it basically almost looks like it's rotting, but that is just sort of this orangey staining reaction that happens. It's also very common with our hedgehog hydnum mushrooms. In particular, you damage them and they stain orange very rapidly. But these, because of their, sort of orangey color already, it almost looks like it's going bad. But the reality is, I don't know exactly what the deal is, but it's kind of wet. But nonetheless, it just takes on this color over time. This is not consistent with all chanterelle species. This is the last thing I guess I'll say about chanterelles. Is they're a great example of how you can get rather good at mushroom hunting and still have a lot of space to grow in terms of your study of mycology. So chanterelles are one of the most commonly picked wild mushrooms, at least to my knowledge. They grow in association with all kinds of oak trees, and there's different species out west. But the thing that's interesting is that I could not tell you without, looking at a book and spending a good bit of time and messing around, what specific Cantharellus species this is. So Cantharellus is the genus that contains chanterelles as a whole, and there's a lot of them, and a lot of them in North Carolina that are either poorly, it's just very, very difficult to tell them apart with just your eyeballs. And then also I haven't done enough in the way of study. So I'm like, okay, I'm really familiar with chanterelles. I started picking them on the West Coast, well in excess of 10 years ago. When I moved here, I recognized them instantaneously because they have, the Cantharellus genus is very, very distinct. However, I could not tell you which specific chanterelle mushroom this is. And so, the challenge ahead of me is to become more familiar with the different species therein. Because, of course, the better you know the different species, the better you can observe their habits and get better at finding them. So, the last thing I will mention about chanterelles as well in my area, in the North Carolina Piedmont, is that they like to grow in areas where there's a lot of this plant. This is muscadine. So basically it's a little, grape situation, but you'll find it growing on the ground. It's not bearing, it doesn't bear fruit when it's on the ground, but you'll find it all over the place in chanterelle patches. So when I'm scouting for new locations, what I'm looking for is, reasonably middle-sized oaks, not grandfather oaks. So I'm looking at kind of young-ish forests with ample, open space for me to move around and not, step on somebody. But also I look for muscadine. I look for running cedar as well. And I do also oftentimes find wild ginger in chanterelle patches. So that's kind of the, the gestalt of the area where you'll find them. And because they're mycorrhizal, because they grow in association with, trees and plants, they will come back in the same spot year after year after year, and they're very abundant. I'm going to have some water, and then we'll talk about the other stuff I found. All right, so that's chanterelles in a nutshell. Hopefully there will be a lot more of them, and they'll last until, September maybe. The next thing I want to talk to you about is a destroying angel. So this is a highly, highly toxic mushroom. It could, kill me. And as you can see, I am handling it freely without fear. So you have to actually eat a poisonous mushroom for it to do you harm. So, I'm perfectly comfortable handling it and so forth. I won't mix it up with my edible mushrooms, and I'm also going to, I'm going to wash my hands because of the next mushroom I'm going to show you, which is both toxic and stinky, but, nonetheless. So this is most likely Amanita bisporigera, but the common name here is destroying angel. And I say most likely because that is the most common destroying angel species in this part of the world. But I'm not quite sure, and I need to go home and reference my books. The reason being that the base of the stem, we have a really beautiful cup of tissue here. And it has this little crimp in it. And so I'm a little curious if this isn't a different destroying angel species. And that crimp is interesting to me and unusual in terms of there's all Amanitas have some sort of material at the base of the stem. So it could be a cup, it could be a big old bulb. We're going to look at one of those in a minute. It could be ridged zones. Oftentimes, you have, a cup or sac of tissue at the base of the stem. That is the remnant of a little egg that the mushroom was protected by when it was, just barely born. But when, that bursts, you get a cup or a sac or whatever. But the crimp here is a little bit interesting because it's just a little unusual. So I'm going to spend some time with a lovely book called Amanitas of North America that I just got recently, and also with some of the beset books for the southeastern U.S. So those are my regional field guides. I'm going to spend some time looking up this specific mushroom and see if I can figure out what is going on here. And it could be that it's Amanita bisporigera, but at the same time, I'm like, that's a little unusual just because, the base, it's like a solid bulb, but then you have a cup and there's this little crimp. Anyway, super duper cute. But destroying angels are relatively easy to identify. They are in Amanita Section Phalloidiae. So Amanita is a big old genus. It has a lot of mushrooms in it, cap and stem deals, oftentimes, as I mentioned, some sort of material at the base. And very frequently, they also have a ring on the stem. And many of them, not all, but most, have white gills. And so Amanitas split up into a number of different sections that have different characteristics. And Amanita Section Phalloidiae contains Amanita phalloides, the death cap mushroom, Amanita bisporigera, which is the eastern, one of the eastern destroying angels. There are a number of other eastern destroying angels. We also have Amanita ocreata out west, so that's another one that gets called destroying angel. All of them highly, highly toxic. So what you're dealing with here is a mushroom that has this really distinct cup at the base. So we have other sections of Amanita that have, ridge zones or something similar. But this is like it came up in a little egg and the egg broke and then you have this cup. Additionally, you have a mushroom that is bald on the top. Oftentimes, I think there might be some phalloideae that have striations. So those are like stripy grooves on the top of the cap. But in general, like Amanita bisporigera, what you're looking at is a white mushroom or very, very pale mushroom with white gills, a ring on the stem, and then a bald cap. And so it doesn't have, any flakes or any warts on it. It also doesn't have any striations. So it's just sort of a flat, matte surface. And similarly with Amanita phalloides, it does not have, striations. It almost has a little bit of a like greenish streakiness to it. So that's kind of how you can tell the difference between a destroying angel and a death cap. As just, the death cap group of mushrooms generally are white mushrooms and oftentimes very, very beautiful. This one is a little bit off-colored, and the reason for that is it was lying underneath a whole bunch of decomposing leaf litter. And so I have some sort of, like reddish tones almost, and a little bit of yellow on this beautiful ring on the stem. But I think that is just, the consequence of being in contact with things that were that color. So this is a mushroom that could shut down your liver. You probably, like if you got medical care promptly, you probably would not die. So the, recovery rate is in the 90% range for people who get Amanita poisoning in North America. And that is not to say it isn't an absolutely horrible experience. And so it's like it is a medical crisis. And this is the reason that people are scared of mushrooms. Another thing that is interesting to me, and sometimes when I'm in, mushroom groups and we're having discussions about determining edibility, the question comes up like, if a mushroom is eaten by wildlife, is it safe for human consumption? And the answer is absolutely not. Whatever, different enzymatic and biochemical reactions are happening in squirrel bellies and slug bellies does not tell you anything at all about what would happen if I ate this mushroom. And case in point, something that is probably or almost certainly still running around was munching on this this deadly destroying angel this morning. All right, so Amanita bisporigera or similar, like I'm really curious again about this crimped vulva, and that's the name for okay, so the egg that I've been referring to is called a universal veil, and then when it breaks, it leaves a vulval sac is what this specific type of Amanita base is called. So anyway, I'm going to be looking this up to see what kind of Amanita it is, if I can determine that. All right, so I'm going to talk about another Amanita. This is the one that I am going to wash my hands absolutely after handling. This is a baby, so I'm fairly certain that this is Amanita rhopalopus. I love to say that. It could also be Amanita daucipes. So these are Amanitas that in general, if you're talking about different Amanita sections, people will call it Amanita Section Lepidella. I'm going to say that there are some taxonomy changes happening I will not cover because I have not read up on them. My understanding is that a lot of the mushrooms like Amanita rhopalopus and daucipes are being moved to a new section. So there are two new sections of the Amanita genus called Roanokensis, so like Roanoke, Virginia, and then Strobiloformes. And I'm going to remember that one because Strobilomyces is the old man of the woods and is kind of a floofy mushroom on top. And a lot of these mushrooms have similar sort of almost like floofiness. But I haven't gotten far enough to like understand that. Most of the time, if you were to, talk about this with, even really experienced folks, folks, they'd still call this Amanita Section Lepidella. And I am just going to continue calling it, Amanita rhopalopus or daucipes or similar, and then hopefully I will take the time to read the paper. But more importantly, like there's a paper, and I guess there is a presentation that Rod Toulos, who is our Amanita expert for North America, really does wonderful work on amanitaceae.org. But anyway, I guess that there's a presentation that he has that sort of covers these changes, and I have not digested any of that information, and I also will need scientific interpretation, because oftentimes I get to that place where it's like, we've had a change, I read abstracts and I start to read some of the methodology, and I'm like, I want to make sure that I'm contextualizing this properly. So anyway, Amanita rhopalopus, I'm going to call it that because I actually think that's most likely the identification for this. So this mushroom will get to be very, very large. It could be, up to 8 to 10 inches. Oftentimes the diameter is about the size of my hand. What happens here is you have a cap that gets very, very, wide, opens up, and it has these sort of like creamy, yellowy white gills that are very deep and blade-like. Sometimes you'll have a big fat ring on the stem of these mushrooms, but sometimes not. The reason being that this material, this floofiness is very evident on the top, oftentimes becomes even floofier as the mushroom matures, and so things start to flake and fall off very rapidly. So you end up with this really colossal mushroom, and it smells very, very strongly of chlorine. And that's why I'm leaning toward rhopalopus as opposed to daucipes. Daucipes, I guess, has more of a meaty aroma, whereas rhopalopus is more like chlorine aroma. But I'm not gonna swear to either of those identifications. In my opinion, up until, a couple of weeks ago, I would have just been like, it's a stinky Lepidella, and left it at that. And now I have to, learn a couple new sections. I need to stop holding this soon. It's really gross. So the thing that makes Lepidellas, or these large mushrooms, really distinct is that they have a bulbous base. And sometimes in this section of Amanita species, you'll see like a long, almost like carrot-sized root type thing. Daucipes and rhopalopus, it's more of they call it a basal bulb. It doesn't have a lot of features, and you'll see the mushroom looks a whole lot like the head of a chess piece, essentially. But you have these big, old, chunky, pieces of material around the edge, and then also all over the top. And as the mushroom opens, you'll see that it just becomes more fragile as the mushroom grows. The other thing that I think is really neat about this specimen, and you'll see this, is that this bulb isn't going to get any bigger. So the mushroom top is going to just pop off, but this is going to stay the same size. And it also has these really cool little radial chunks here that is very fun. However, in general, a lot of mushrooms that have bulbs, the bulbs have a lot more features, and that's actually a thing that's very distinctive about this. Is it's big, it's flaky, it has these kind of creamy gills that are very large, and it smells like chlorine. Sometimes has a little bit of staining too. That's another thing that I'm seeing here that is noted in literature about daucipes and rhopalopus, is you get kind of a reddish brown stain when you handle it. But the bulb that doesn't have a lot of features and isn't extended or elongated into the ground is what you're looking at. So that's that mushroom. I'm going to put it down. One final note on it: don't collect this mushroom and then leave it in your car overnight. That I did once and I will never do again. All right, so that's 3. We're going to rock and roll through the last 2. All right, so I said I was going to do Sterium Austria last, but I'm not, because the last one, I'm going to save the prettiest one for last. So this is the false turkey tail, also known as Sterium Austria. It is additionally called the parchment fungus. So what you have is a mushroom that grows on wood, and turkey tail is a mushroom that a lot of people gather, use medicinally. It's very decorative and beautiful. I like to gather it and use it in arts and crafts. Sterium looks very, very similar. So what you have is a mushroom that kind of grows on wood, and it is not fleshy. And so there's mushrooms that are fleshy and mushrooms that are more on the woody, corky side of things. And so this is the woody, corky side of the fence for sure. And in this case, you have sort of radial growth zones. That's another thing that this shares with turkey tails. And so, you know, this is why people mistake one for the other, is these sort of greenish radial growth zones, and then, you know, growing on wood, and oftentimes in these large overlapping colonies. But the parchment fungus is different. It's not harmful, but, you know, you wouldn't really want to, like, people make teas and things, and I don't think Sterrium tea would be, I actually haven't talk to anybody who's done it, but nonetheless, don't do it. I don't think it would hurt you, but I don't think it would taste very good. All right, so you know, the difference between turkey tail and Sterrium is called parchment fungus because it has a very nice smooth undersurface. When it is younger, it is a paler color. There's other Sterriums that are also more brightly colored. This one's been around for a few weeks, so it's kind of just this pale, like brownish color, and it's very, very smooth. In the case of turkey tail, that would be white, and it would be porous, and so like it would be a little sandpapery. Additionally, the fruiting body is very dry, and you can break it right apart, and you know, you write little mouse ransom notes on it and so forth, whereas a turkey tail, it has a little bit more, you know, it's a little more robust. There's a little more fruiting body there, and it more is corky, so when you rip it, it gives you a little more resistance, and is certainly capable of retaining more water. All right, so Sterrium austria, false turkey tail. And then last but certainly not least, I wanted to share with you boletes oriflammeus. This is known as the flaming gold bolete. Unfortunately, we have a really big bite out of it, so we have to do some, I can put my finger in here and keep them intact. So this is a mushroom that is really identifiable because of its coloration and a couple of features. But first of all, it is a bolete type mushroom. So boletes is one of the different genera that you know, contain these spongy bottomed mushrooms. And so instead of gills or wrinkles, or, you know, in the case of this dude, like just a flat surface, you have basically a little sponge, and that's where the spores come from. So boletes is a genus that oftentimes has mushrooms that have golden colors. Another thing that I've noticed about them, and I don't know if this is like a consistent feature, many of them are more tall and slender than other boletes. And so there's a lot of other, you know, genera in the Boletaceae and all the different spongy bottom mushrooms, and many of them are big and fat, whereas boletes, a couple of them are, you know, tall and slender. Boletes oriflammeus is, again, flaming gold bolete, and you can see why. It's just this really beautiful sort of golden, you know, Spanish orange color all the way, you know, all over the fruiting body. On the top of the mushroom, oftentimes it's a little bit rough. It's not furry, but it's kind of soft and matte. So one thing that you'll see a lot with boletes is that they'll be sticky or tacky or slimy. And so the fact that this is not is an identifying feature for this mushroom. Another thing that I really like about this species, let's see, I'm always struggling to get the right focus. Okay, there we go. So you can see a little bit of streaky lines on the stem, and they're kind of I'm struggling to get the right focus point here. Nuts. Oh, okay. That's about as good as I'm gonna get. It's pretty faint, but basically you have some, you know, like kind of like wrinkles, but they're all vertical, and so, you know, you have it's similar to reticulation, which is just basically like a netted interlocking sort of texture over the top of mushroom stem, and that's very, very common with boletes in general, but this is more streaky. But again, the color is a dead giveaway. It's also, as I mentioned, sort of more slender than many boletes. Another thing that I've noticed with this species is that it often will twin up. So you'll see 2 or 3 of them conjoined at the base, oftentimes with a little baby and, you know, a slightly older one. And they often have these like bodacious curves and things. So I really, really love this species. It's just so colorful. And, you know, I spotted it at a distance and I was in my chanterelle patch. And at first I was like, oh, there's one more chanterelle. I'll have 3 total and that'll be wonderful. And as I approached it, I'm like, no, that's far too, you know, orangey for the chanterelles that I'm likely to find today. And I was absolutely delighted to unearth this pair. So that's all I have to share for today. We got some poisonous things, some tasty things, and some beautiful things, but I hope that it rains this next couple of weeks and we'll start to see other boletes and other amanitas and hopefully a ton more chanterelles, because I've got my dander up for wild mushroom pizza and I want to scratch that itch. I hope you're all well, and we'll be talking soon.